Where in the Quran can I find good reason to believe that the Quran is inspired by God? And there are 5 arguments that I found Muslims using most commonly, and I myself used some of these arguments, to show that the Quran is inspired of Allah. The first argument is the Quran's own argument. 5 times in the Quran, a challenge is issued, saying, if you think this book is a forgery, try to write another book like it. It doesn't matter if you call all your friends, it doesn't matter if you call jinn, which are kind of like demons, but not really. You call jinn and men alongside you and try to write something like the Quran, you will not be able to. That's the challenge the Quran gave 5 times. It's in fact the only defense. People used to come up to Muhammad and say, you are but a forger. This is recorded in the Quran. You are someone who's committing a forgery. You're just copying poems, or you're just saying poems. The Quran's challenge is, you try to recite something like this. You couldn't do it. Doesn't matter how you look at that argument, it has been answered. If you look at it methodologically, is it even an objective argument to say this is as good as that? It's too subjective in its methodology to be a real test. So it fails in its own methodology. It fails in the sense that it's trying to show something out of excellence means it's written by God. I'm not going to argue, like if I like, I don't know, if I like Kirk Cameron films, I'm not going to argue he's God because his acting is so good. I'm not going to argue that Eminem's rapping makes him divine. It's good stuff, sure, but that doesn't make him divine. So even the end point is not necessarily true. But what's more, the challenge has been met. There's a book called Al-Furqan. Al-Furqan al-Haq, I believe it's called, the True Furqan. And this is a book that was written in the past few decades, which attempts to copy Quranic style, try to write a book like it. It attempts to copy Quranic style, yet teach other doctrine. And so using Quranic orthography, using Quranic poetry and grammar, it tries to produce something like the Quran. This book has been recited in public places throughout the Islamic world, and Muslims regularly come up to those reciting it and saying thank you for having recited the Quran in public. That's how well it matches the challenge. In fact, India has found this such a devastating book that they have banned it from entry in its borders. So that the challenge has been answered methodologically in its endpoint, and also the challenge itself has been answered. It doesn't work. What's the second most common argument I see for the inspiration of the Quran? The second most common argument I see for the inspiration of the Quran is that there are scientific miracles found in the Quran. In other words, there's such advanced science found in the Quran that it could not have been written by a man who was just a man, who only had human knowledge. Either he had prophetic knowledge, thereby making Muhammad a prophet, or the Quran is inspired by Allah, and so you have the inspiration of the Quran. And the arguments that are used is, for example, the Quran has miraculous knowledge about the oceans. The Quran has miraculous knowledge about the atmosphere. The Quran has miraculous knowledge about X, Y, and Z. I believed this as a Muslim. In fact, there's a whole book published on this by a French physician named Maurice Bucaille, and it's called The Quran, the Bible, and Science. And so I had that book as a Muslim, and I used to go through it, and I used to use the arguments. But by this point in my own investigation, I was in medical school, and I was able to study science, especially things like embryology, human development, in the Quran, knowing my knowledge from medical school, and testing to see whether or not they're true. And I'll give you one example. In the Quran, it gives a process of embryological development. In fact, this is one of the most popular examples used by Muslims. It's found in Maurice Bucaille's book as well. And it gives this development process. And at one point in the process, it says that this embryo, it says this clot, this leech-like substance, is then developed by God into bones, and then it is clothed by flesh, and then it becomes something entirely new. And so it's pointing to this process of embryological development. Well, the problem is, ask anybody who studied embryology, that's not how it works. You don't get first bones, then flesh, then developed into something new. You have the same embryological layer, the mesoderm, that differentiates into both muscles and bones at the same time. And so it's wrong. It's not true. And so when you have clear statements in the Quran that are shown false, you can't point to obscure ones to try to say this is somehow scientifically miraculous. If the clear ones are false, why are you pointing to obscure ones to say it's true? And if you need something more clear, the Quran says, and forgive me if this is a bit crass, I don't believe it is, but it's in the Quran, and here's what it says. It says that the sperm, a man's sperm, comes from between his backbone and his ribs. No, it does not. It doesn't really take much of a degree in medicine to prove that, but I have one, and I assure you that's not where it comes from. So, how is it that this is defended? Well, Muslims will say you have to look at one of those words. It's a feminine, the other one's masculine, and so what it's saying is that, oh, when a woman and a man get together. No, look, when the clear statements have to be reinterpreted in order to be shown to be scientifically true, then you're not coming objectively. You're coming with the bias. And someone who comes objectively to this is not going to conclude what you conclude. And so that argument isn't enough to convince an objective observer either.